The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says South Africa remains a strategic partner on the African continent. Speaking during a working visit to South Africa, Blinken touched on trade, global politics and security. The South African International and Corporations Minister Naledi Pandor and her counterpart from the U.S. also weighed in on the current war in Ukraine, the situation in the Middle East, and U.S.-China strained relations. Joining us now is SABC senior reporter Khayelihle Khumalo, who is there. So, Khayelihle, let's first talk about the kind of reception the U.S. Secretary of State received and the posture of the visit.
Well, by all accounts, it was very warm in terms of his reception. It all started at a very significant site in terms of South Africa's anti-apartheid struggle, where he went to Soweto, the Hector Peterson Museum, really just connecting with the country's history, but also drawing the parallels between the US in terms of they are also fighting against racial inequity, but also in terms of other issues as well. Quite a very strong delegation that he came with at SABC, and really issues of trade, deepening economic ties, the political links, and many other aspects as well, because they do have a strategic partnership in so many areas. But also, most importantly, it was a way to reaffirm that Washington, D.C. is still keen to work with South Africa as a gateway to at least the southern part of the continent in so many aspects.
As you say, he brought a strong delegation. This is ahead of the new appointee in terms of the U.S. ambassador to South Africa, a very important position in itself. And the person who has been chosen, much interest in that. Do you think that sets the tone for the new appointee?
Well, that's right, Tsepiso, because the ambassador designate was, throughout the discussions, he was attending and just observing just the country as well, so to speak. But also, apart from that, we do believe that in a matter of days or so, he's going to hand in his credentials to the president. And then once he's accredited, that's when we can have a proper engagement with him. But someone also is very keen about South Africa's history as well, in terms of his profile, his credentials. This is a former US AU ambassador, so a wealth of knowledge in terms of sub-Saharan Africa, but also a very interesting visit to Tsepiso. It comes right in the wake of Mr. Lavrov, the Russian Federation Foreign Affairs Minister, where the US says Africa remains a very indispensable partner.
And a visit, no doubt, that his intention is meant to enforce the charm offensive from the United States, as you say, on the back of other diplomatic missions here, who are really here to sway not only the ideological approach on the conflict in Europe, but most importantly, future trade relations. You mentioned South Africa being a gateway. So how does, leaving South Africa and the tone left here, enforce going to other countries and taking the same message without really alienating anybody as lesser than? Because the big brother moniker or reputation South Africa has garnered, fairly or unfairly, has impacted on relations on the continent as well.
Well, that's right, Tsepiso, especially because, one of the main issues is about the economy. Especially in light of COVID-19, where the economies really were battered by the pandemic and its effect in terms of the ramifications, but also in the main. You do have about 600 American companies based in South Africa and working in so many areas in terms of the motoring sector, in terms of energy, also an issue around the people-to-people contact, the tourists coming to the US. So there was a very strong emphasis that the trade volumes as well between the two nations has grown quite substantially. And obviously there's always a room for improvement in terms of trying to bolster that. But also something that is quite interesting from Secretary Blinken was it's quite important for him to be back in South Africa. You go back to that delegation that was led by former US President Bill Clinton back in the early 90s with Madiba as a leader. He was part of the delegation, but also when former US President, again, Obama was here, he was also part of the delegation. So he was quite delighted to reconnect as well with South Africa, a country that he calls a very vibrant democracy and very important in so many aspects that he was able to come here in South Africa.
So what's next on his agenda?
So he's going to go to the Democratic Republic of Congo. We do know that SABC, in light of the destabilization with the rise of M23 in the eastern part of Congo, it's a great deal of concern given the very significance of the Great Lakes region. Apart from that, he's going to go as well to Rwanda, where another very important issue will be raised, SABC, around the arrest of the U.S. permanent resident, Mr. Paul Rusesabagina. So the U.S. does believe that his arrest is wrong, but I mean, obviously, Kigali does believe that they have a very quite substantial ground in terms of his arrest with a host of terrorism charges. A man who was quite known for that movie, Hotel Rwanda, but also something that was very nice during the course of today, SABC, was the very fact, a very incredible warning from Minister Pandor to Ambassador Designate from the US that, well, if you don't tweet about me, you're going to have a good time in South Africa.
Let's see how that warning is taken. Thank you very much, Khayelihle Khumalo, my colleague who was there with the US and South African delegations during the talks.